just so you know what to expect, pizza's due here at 6:45.
At 6:45?
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone object to bearing the aroma of pizza while we just kind of like wait for a natural moment to pause, as opposed to stopping very early on? Just bear the aroma of the pizza. When it's here, I'll make a mental note to kind of get us to an intermission, and then we'll go from there. All right? All right, so good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Charles Ray, and I guess for all intents and purposes, I'm going to be the MC for this evening. And what I mean by MC is simply that I'm going to attempt to bring my energy and my skill set forward so that we can extract information from the more or less the man of the hour. Seated to my right is Anthony Ways. He is my cousin, but even greater than that, he is someone in the city of Camden who really exemplifies so much of what the city of Camden is and is about and what it could be. And I think through hearing his narrative, hearing his story, not just the substance of it, but how it's actually articulated from him as a person and as a man, I think it will go a very long way in enlightening the individuals in this room who don't already know him as to the types of people and the quality of character that you can find here in the city of Camden, whether you're looking for it or not. I will quickly give a quick overview as to what this event more or less is. This is essentially the Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project bus tour. And every year that I've done this in the past, Joe Friedman, who is the director, we've done a bus tour of the city of Camden. And during that bus tour, we will visit locations that we have pre-scheduled, where we would interact with someone high-ranking as a representative of that organization. So for instance, we've done Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital. We've done Millennial Skate Rink. We've done the Walter Rand Transportation Center. We've done some of the development down at the waterfront. We've done political entities here in the city. So we basically attempt to give the Marshall Brennan Fellows the opportunity to see the city of Camden from the vantage point of someone who is connected, if you will. And through that lens, they're able to see a portion or a facet of the city that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise had exposure to had they just had the opportunity to just teach in the high schools. This year, we're doing something different. We are having our guests come to us as opposed to go to their actual location. Another thing that becomes part of the bus tour, and Jill can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it ends up becoming a de facto psychologist session for me, where I basically share parts of my upbringing as growing up in the city of Camden, but it usually veers off and it addresses other facets of my life, such as college and certainly my professional career as an attorney, as a fitness instructor, and even now as a college professor, adjunct professor. So I only say all of those things to basically give you a windshield view as to what this event is, how it's come about, what it's typically entailed. But as I said, this evening, we're going to try to adapt that to really give some light and some exposure to the story of Anthony Ways. Now, part of this will be Q&A between myself and Anthony. And in that regard, I think it should feel more or less like an interview. Other parts of this will be purely him speaking. And then other parts will be me sort of augmenting where I see fit, bits and pieces of our discussion. I'm going to start off with a little bit of an overview. If you don't mind, I'm going to tell give a little bio on you, and also a little narrative on what your life has been like, some of the major moments, and then we can get into the details in a more granular fashion thereafter. But Anthony Ways is the owner and founder of no less than 3 organizations or enterprises here in the city of Camden. He is the owner, director, and founder of the Can Do program. That stands for the Camden African Neighborhood Development Organization. And through that platform, he's able to meet the needs of the residents here in the city of Camden through various enterprises and through various events that he organizes and creates platforms for people to interact and also improve themselves. He's also the founder of a radio station here in the city of Camden, which is WCMD. And more or less that functions as a broadcast or podcast platform for individuals with a story to tell or an event that they want to give exposure to. I suppose, and you can correct me whenever I'm wrong, that this is the medium that he's using now to amplify the voices for the issues and the topics that he believes are near and dear to his heart and are relevant specifically to the city of Camden. Thirdly, he has a program called Collab, and it's a rather clever name for it because most of the time when you hear the word collab, you think of a collaboration, someone collaborating. This one, however, is spelled slightly different but pronounced the same, and it's CYLAB, Collab. And essentially, this is a organization that he has, which are founded on certain tenets, all of which I'm going to summarily call self-empowerment and self-improvement. So he tries to teach the youth of the city of Camden and provide instruction on the issues such as self-awareness, self-empowerment, community empowerment, ownership. He tries to educate them such that they can become financially literate and address social justice issues, as well as leadership and mentorship guidance that they provide. I also understand that there is a talent development portion of that as well. So through those 3 vehicles, and there may be more, but those were only the 3 that I was able to track down online. Through those vehicles, he's able to essentially create an amplification of himself, to basically spread his arms wider and to open his ear wider and to recruit individuals into this circle where he believes they could be if they wanted to be a better version of themselves in the future. So that's who he is contemporaneously. I guess you can consider that an entrepreneur. I guess you can consider that a businessman. I guess you can consider that a philanthropist. I guess you can consider that a man of the people, a true representative of the city of Camden. That said, all those things sound great and wonderful, and you might wonder, how did one get to that point? What were the various turns and the forks in the road that led him down this path? One of the reasons why I spoke to Jill about this was because I felt as though his story was so powerful, so unique, and very, very apropos to discuss in the context of a legal setting. And that was one of the reasons why we came here. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. It's a really, I hope I got the answer to this question right. They say a lawyer should never ask a question that they don't know the answer to. So here's my, could you tell me what year you were born?
1969.
All right, so my research did not fail me. So 1969. I'm going to start there because that was the year he was born. But I'm also going to start there because I think you'll see through a series of totally unrelated conditions and circumstances that it ended up feeding into ultimately what became the story. So 1969 is around the time where Richard Nixon was president. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with who Richard Nixon is or what his legacy stands for, but one of the things that I most associate with Richard Nixon is the fact that he was the president who officially declared a war on drugs, right? And when he declared that war on drugs, that was a statement that he made in passing, but it basically grew into a movement, a nationwide movement altogether, that had some pretty significant effects. Significant effects certainly on urban areas and urban communities, and because in those urban communities there are members of the Black American or African American community that are concentrated there, it had particularly significant effects on them / us. So I think that's interesting that you were born in 1969, because in my mind that is a very, very interesting year, just in the history and the legacy of what Camden City ultimately became. So Nixon declares this war on drugs, and right around that time, the 1969, I'm going to say 1969 to 1971 time period, if anyone is familiar with the history of the city of Camden, that's also the same exact time where these huge riots broke out in the city of Camden. Riots that ultimately made our city infamous. And tremendous amount of damage was done to property. Certainly tremendous hardship was perpetrated upon the participants at the hands of the police force. Indeed, there were significant instances documented of police brutality here in the city. And as a natural consequence of those elements, individuals lost their lives. So the city of Camden, the nation, and now even our man of the hour, Anthony Ways, can trace pretty significant events back to the year of 1969. Let's fast forward though. I want to fast forward about 20 years. And I'm only fast forwarding 20 years because I want to ultimately give Anthony Ways the floor to speak. But you fast forward 20 years, and now we're in 1989, right? And 1989, we have a different president in office. The president we have, technically, as of the beginning of 1989, is Ronald Reagan. He's the outgoing president. The incoming president is one George H.W. Bush. Here in the state of New Jersey, our governor was Christy Todd Whitman, and I mean, candidly, 1989 may not have any significance. Just really quick, were you guys born in 1989? But you three were not born in 1989. So probably the extent of your familiarity with 1989 is probably like Taylor Swift's album was like named 1989 because that's the year she was born or something like that. But no, 1989 was a very significant year. Around that time, the population in the city of Camden was about 88,000 people, slightly more than what it is today. Not a big city, but certainly a densely populated city with a racial or ethnic makeup of about 48% Hispanic, about 48% Black, and the rest other. I tracked down an article from the New York Times because ideally I would have loved to have been able to show imagery from that time period to give you all an idea as to what the city looked like. But candidly, if you just venture off of some of the main corridors here in the city and you stumble into a neighborhood that hasn't experienced gentrification, you'll probably see a pretty good representative of what the city looked like in 1989. That is to say, the blight that's there now is not new. This is something that has been around and lingering. Certainly not exclusively, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to make that assertion. But I found a New York Times article dated January 2nd, 1989. And it says, and this is a description of the city of Camden, except for a couple of blocks downtown, Camden looks like a war zone, with block after block of burned buildings, collapsing buildings, half-gutted buildings, boarded up buildings, and a staggering succession of lots covered with rubble. For the children of Camden, it might just as well be a war zone, a bleak outpost in a long battle against drugs, domestic violence, poverty, where shootouts, arrests, and beatings are part of everyday life. Recent statistics on the city, and this is again from 1989, paint a dismal picture. Essentially, we're in upwards of 51% of the children in the city are living at or below the poverty line. Camden had the nickname the welfare city, with nearly 2 out of 3 children in town living in families that receive help under aid to families with dependent children or general assistance / food stamps. Now the article goes on and it paints a picture. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because this is a time period where that was particularly developmental for and transformative for Mr. Wade's. I did some additional research because I wanted to make sure that I was really up to my stuff in presenting here. So in 1989, I would have been 9 years old. You would have been 19. So there's about a 10-year age difference between the two of us. 1989, I remember the city of Camden. I remember it well. I remember you would see, and I believe the car, I didn't get a chance to research it, so I feel bad in this, era of everything can be Googled and researced almost instantaneously. Point 8 is, were you about to say that? I wish I would have said it first. I wish you would have said it simultaneously. So the point 8, they were Corollas, right? Yeah, so the point 8 Corollas were ubiquitous. I mean, everybody had one. Everybody. And everybody had a knock in it. That was the term that we used for
radio
system, right? Everyone had a knock in it. And you would walk down the streets, and I mean, it was literally as if the party was coming to you. So you would hear music out of these car stereo systems, and you would hear songs such as Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul. You would hear Bust a Move by Young MC, which was a song that was popular back then. And you hear a whole host of other songs. I'm pretty sure at this point the MC Hammer thing had kind of faded out, but there was that element. LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Terminator X, all of those things were, and I bring these up because this is not just the music that was on the radio station. This was the soundtrack of my life. This was what it sounded like to grow up in the city of Camden. You had your typical, neighborhood commotion. Nothing crazy, just kids running around, people, on bikes, popping willies on bikes, and, a basketball court set up out of a crate. Little boys in the street playing two-hand tag football in the middle of the street. And so I know what the New York Times says about it and how they paint the picture, but this was home for me. This was home for Anthony Wade's. And the memories I have it aren't as tortured as some of the descriptions might otherwise lead one to think. So it was fun. It was exciting. It felt very much so alive. It had an energy to it. And so fast forward now a little bit deeper into 1989. April 23rd, 1989, a day that in his personal story will go down in history, was a day that 2 gentlemen, one, Mr. Wayne Hunter, and the other one, Mr. John Weiss. I apologize if I mispronounce the name. These 2 guys were friends, and they were hanging out in Haddonfield, New Jersey, I believe, or Haddon Township, New Jersey. And given their age, late 20s, early teens, they were doing what guys did at that time, without anything else better to do. So they were drinking, they were engaging in some recreational drug use. And at some point, they made a decision. And that decision was to make a trip to the city of Camden to meet with a specific, not with a specific, but at a specific location to obtain some more drugs. So with that decision, the two of them proceeded to drive to the city of Camden. At the time, Mr. Wayne Hunter was the driver of the vehicle and Mr. John Weist was the passenger. So they drive to the city of Camden, and there they attempt to obtain some drugs. They arrive at a location, and at that location, they ultimately make eye contact with someone who recognized them as people trying to score some drugs, and they recognize him as someone who might be able to supply those drugs. And they make eye contact with one another, and the instructions are given for the car to pull over. So the car pulls over to the side of the road, and the gentleman who made eye contact with them, I guess, proceeds to go into an alleyway. He goes into that alleyway and he comes back out. That alleyway was stationed between a house and a liquor store, all right? For all intents and purposes, let's just say a house and a liquor store. So he comes back out and he goes up to the car, and clearly I was not there, and I should say for none of this story, I was there. This is just research and good old-fashioned legal analysis. Comes back out to the car, and at some point in time, he tells the individuals to give him their money, and he brandishes a weapon. He brandishes a gun. The individuals, startled by this turn of events, ultimately pull off, certainly in a panic, try to get out of there to flee the scene, and the weapon discharges. When the weapon discharges, the passenger in the car was struck. The car continues to drive off. Maybe a block or two down the road, the car gets into an accident with another car. Nonetheless, car crashes and still proceeds about fleeing the scene. Ultimately, the car is driven to a hospital in, I believe, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where the passenger is treated by the medical staff there, but it is determined that his wounds were fatal, and so he did not survive the gunshot. Thereafter, the driver of the vehicle obviously reports this to the authorities, right? Makes a bunch of sense. Someone gets shot, someone gets killed, they're in your car, they're driving, you have some explaining to do, right? So he explains to the police essentially what happened and where about the events took place. So the police open an investigation, go to the scene, and based off of the passengers' directions, they end up going to a place called the Time and Place Lounge. At the Time and Place Lounge, the police obviously engaged people in inquiry, and the reason why they stopped at the Time and Place Lounge is because one of the descriptions given by the passenger was that the shooting took place leaving more or less an area that was, leaving an area where there was a bar, and that this particular bar had a cyclone fence, right? That was one of the descriptions that was given to anchor that part of the narrative. It had a cyclone fence. Earlier when I was telling you the story, I said that the guy who was the purported drug dealer in the whole situation before he went to the car, what did he do? Made eye contact. But before he made his way over to the car, he went
In an alley.
to an alley, right? And then he left that alley and then went directly to the car. Well, even though they arrived at this lounge called the Time and Place Lounge, and it had the cyclone fence as he had recalled, this bar did not have an alley nearby, right? Nonetheless, the police did their investigation. Mr. Hunter, the passenger, informs the police that he also suffered from nearsightedness in that he wasn't wearing his glasses on that evening. And so that more or less was the pertinent part of that portion of the story. Fast forward a few hours, and again, I apologize, I know I'm telling you a narrative, but I'm trying to set it up. Ultimately, Anthony Ways is brought in. Not brought in. And ultimately, Anthony Ways his image was produced in a lineup. Was it a picture lineup or was it an actual? Did you have to show up?
It was a picture lineup.
It was a picture lineup.
Only photograph.
Only a photograph. Yeah. So the police produced essentially a suspect lineup. Shows various pictures, and he asks, does any of these guys look like the guy who shot your friend? Well, one of the descriptions that the guy remembered was that the guy who had shot his friend was wearing a hat. A hat. In this picture lineup,
I was the only one wearing a hat.
Anthony Waits is the only one wearing a hat. So, armed with that amount of information and whatever details that he could recall from that night, he identified Anthony Waits as the man who had attempted to sell him drugs, but ultimately ended up shooting him. Now, at the time, what were you up to in your life?
So sticking to your narrative a little bit, I would add that corporate America ran from Camden. You know, I'm talking about Campbell Soup and the likes. So in that time frame, most people in my age group, choices was really like low wage jobs, the police department, or the lucrative business of narcotics. So in that journey of, you know, trying to provide for myself and my little brother, I chose that path to sell narcotics.
So at the time, it's fair to say that you were involved in the street trade of selling drugs.
Absolutely.
All right. Did you have any affiliations at the time with groups or organizations that might be relevant to who you were at that particular time?
So in our group, like I said, it was my little brother. I had a couple friends that they was brothers. So we created what we call it the family, because we were made up of different family groups. In that term, you know, we tried to organize and try to find a way to earn money. There was a gang officer from the neighborhood named Lenny Hall, who, once they identified us, he termed us the Hilltop Posse, because we was on top of the hill and entering into the neighborhood. So the officer gave us that name, called the Hilltop Posse.
Okay. So taken aggregately then, you're saying that approximately 1989, April of 1989, that you were admittedly involved in selling drugs, and you were part of an organization of you and your friends that more or less had obtained the name Hilltop Posse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So at the time, the Time and Place Lounge was located in the area where you lived and most of your friends lived.
Yes, it was the Time and Place Lounge sits on the corner of what is called the Hilltop. The cross streets is Chase and Lewis, and that was the Hilltop. A few blocks down, where the murder scene occurred, where the alleyway is called Furman and Lewis Street. That was the cross streets. But they was few blocks from each other.
So essentially, what happens from there is that Anthony Wade is identified, and just to put it out there early, do you have a criminal record prior to that? Or
No.
Okay, so 19 years old?
Yes.
You would have been turning 20.
I was turning 20 that September.
That's September, yeah. Ultimately, Anthony Wade was arrested. And he was arrested and he was charged with murder, armed robbery, conspiracy to commit robbery, and some weapons violations. Right? Aggregately, with those charges, do you recall how much time you were facing in jail?
40 to life.
40 to life. Okay. So, obviously, for those of us here who are in law school, this is pretty much how we typically get our cases, right? We get them, we get these files, and we have that much information. And then we have to work the files and try to uncover more details. Only because I promised that I would take a natural break when the pizza arrived. I'll take a natural break right now, and then we'll pick up with the rest of the story, and then ultimately turn it over to Lynn. Is that good?
Cool.
All right, cool. So let's grab pizza, and I'll probably start talking before you finish, but I'll give you enough time to eat like a slice and a half. All right?
From our gang's point of view, at least, it's
All right.
fine to just grab and start.
Yeah, we can continue if y'all want to.